Hey, Sun here. I'm a privacy and security researcher, and you're watching the Privacy Guides. This is my end of the year review. 2021 has been a year with many changes in my setups. I've swapped apps, I've swapped hardware. I actually changed part of my mental model when it comes to how to secure myself and my privacy. So yeah, I'm going to be sharing what has changed with you. The first thing that has changed is I have dropped my mid-2015 MacBook Pro and have switched over to a MacBook Air M1. That has not been an easy transition. A lot of you have asked in the comments, Sun, are you still recommending using, mid-2015 MacBook Pros? Can we upgrade to Big Sur? Is it okay to use Monterey? I've read all of your questions. It took me forever to accept that I would switch from a mid-2015 MacBook Pro to a MacBook Air. What happened is my mid-2015 MacBook Pro, which had a battery that wasn't that old because it had been replaced by Apple after a recall, the battery started inflating again, and I wasn't able to use that computer anymore. I had to send it in for repair. Apple initially did not want to repair it. I had to hustle like crazy. They ended up changing the battery, which involves also changing the whole top plate, the trackpad, and the keyboard, which is about $700 or $800 if you have to pay for this. So Apple accepted to do this, but I had to send the computer to them, and I was tired of that routine of having to send computers in for repair. It was time for me to accept that, we live in a world that isn't perfect. And the best that I could find that suits my needs is the MacBook Air M1. Actually, I had one sent to me for work, and it's actually a really lovely computer for many things, but it has a whole bunch of drawbacks. First things first, it has only those two ports, which as a creator like myself is a big problem. I can only plug one external monitor. I have one right here under the camera that I cannot use anymore to put my notes because I cannot have two external monitors plugged onto this computer. I also use SD cards all the time because I create custom Raspberry Pi projects, so I cannot do this anymore. Now, thankfully-ish, these problems can be solved either by upgrading to the MacBook Pro 14-inch, which I do not like. I have one here stoked away that I use for research. If you would like me to do a review about that, let me know in the comments. But I don't like the notch. I don't like the weight. There's a whole thing, a whole bunch of things that I don't like. But one can use Thunderbolt 4 docks. And I have one of those CalDigits TS3s. That is actually a really good dock with a whole bunch of I/O. So that's what I use now to power my Mac and give me more connectivity. And when I'm on the go, I actually use this one here. It's the USB-C Soho dock. Both have, a whole bunch of features that are really helpful to creators. The TS3 has Ethernet, which is very helpful when one has faster internet. More on this in a second. The other problem with this computer when it was released is Big Sur did not allow application layer firewalls to block all of Apple services from calling home. That was a big privacy deal. I was totally not going to upgrade to Big Sur until I read that that had been fixed. Apple had taken a few steps back and had allowed application layer firewalls such as Little Snitch to block whatever the user wants. And that is one of the requirements that I have on Mac. If this was no longer possible, I would probably be dropping Mac. I wouldn't even consider using a Mac without an application layer firewall that allows me to see what is trying to call home, etc., etc. The other thing is I love spoofing my MAC address. What that means is when I go to different places, I don't want those routers to be aware of the physical unique identifier of my networking chip on my Macs. In order to mitigate this, I've been spoofing my Mac, which means when my computer boots, it generates a random MAC address, and that is what is publicly visible to networks. In order to achieve this, I had this script which worked beautifully on mid-2015 MacBook Pros. It does not work on all Macs, but I am thrilled to say that it does work on M1 Macs on Big Sur. which is really amazing. This guide here has been updated. By the way, if you didn't know about this, if you click on updated, you can see all of the changes that occur on a specific piece of reference material. And thanks to Jonathan's feedback, there's now this table of contents that allows us to just go quickly through the content. So this has been updated to work on Big Sur/M1. So being able to block whatever I want using an application layer firewall and being able to spoof my MAC address, those were two things that were not possible at the beginning and are now possible. So that has allowed me to embrace this. Now, the last thing that, aside from not being able to plug a screen, that was not solved for, the last thing that I wasn't able to solve for is one cannot boot this computer to Tails. And I've started using Tails more and more to do some more sensitive computing, to compartmentalize things away from macOS, which I don't fully trust. There's an episode on this, why I use Mac versus Linux as my daily driver. I'll link to it in the description. But I don't trust my Mac. That's why I used hardened and offline Raspberry Pi devices, and I use Tails. So given I wasn't able to boot Tails onto this computer, I ended up buying a secondhand ThinkPad X1 Yoga that is quite a beautiful computer to use on Tails. First things first, when you boot it, it can be configured in the BIOS to boot off the USB flash drive and not the internal drive, so it will boot to Tails by default. It also has a webcam that works on Tails, and that's been something that has never worked for me when using Mac hardware. It also has a little Tink shutter, meaning one can actually block the webcam physically without putting tape and all kinds of stuff, which I actually forgot to mention in the context of my MacBook Air. I went back to using tape because it is so thin that using those little aluminum things that I recommended a while back in the context of the mid-2015 MacBook Pro, that doesn't work anymore. And I don't want to crack my screen, so I'm just using tape. There's a brand of tape that has worked very well for me. I'll link to it in the description. And there are alternatives. One is iBlock. iBlock is quite great, but it leaves micro scratches on the screen. I'll be creating an episode on this. By the way, anything you hear me talking about, let me know in the comments what episodes I should create first, what you guys are most pumped about. So I mentioned earlier that this here has gigabit Ethernet. And the reason why that became very important for me is that I upgraded my internet here in the lab to 500 megabit symmetrical, which means that I can now upload or download at pretty fast speeds. And Wi-Fi, even if I have a pretty good access point, has a hard time keeping up with it. So I did run a network cable from over there where my modem is all the way to this section of the house. And I also upgraded my router to an Edge Router 12. I would recommend to never, ever, ever, ever use the router that your ISP provides. Internet service providers are pretty sneaky, and I just don't trust them. So I always use the router or the modem, or sometimes it's integrated that they supply, as a hop to my own router, which in this case runs a modified version of Debian, if my memory is correct. So that router is very competent. The other change that faster internet has accelerated is I used to self-host my own VPN at 1984 in Iceland. And I absolutely love 1984, but their infrastructure is limited to 100 megabits. And my home internet now is 500 megabits. So that was limiting how fast I could upload content to YouTube. You may have noticed that the last episodes are available in 4K. It's not really 4K, I'm still shooting this in HD, but when you render it as 4K, it looks much more beautiful on YouTube. So in order for me to be able to upload this content really fast and to be able to eventually live stream or things like this, I needed faster internet, and I also needed more reliable connectivity than Wi-Fi. So as I said, switched to fiber, 500 megabit symmetrical, upgraded router, and I decided to move to using Malvad. Now, I loved self-hosting my own VPN, VPNs can be honeypots. If the person or the organization behind a VPN is malicious, all of our traffic is then routed through them. So that's really bad. That's where Tor is much better because A, there's onion routing, but B, we can hop between different endpoints that are not operated or governed by the same entity. In context of the VPN, whatever endpoint we use, it is governed by the same company. So if someone has a backdoor or forces them to disclose our, networking traffic patterns and stuff, well, we're screwed. That's why I liked self-hosting it at 1984. But self-hosting it meant that I was always on the same IP. So that was not so great for privacy. So not only was I limited by the 100 megabits, but I had no diffusion. Someone tracking a specific IP could derive that it was me. So I decided to switch to Malvad for macOS, and I'm quite happy so far. Malvad has endpoints all over the world, one of which is located here in Montreal, so I can actually go to at least 400 megabits, if not higher, on Malvad, which allows me to publish to YouTube much faster while still preserving diffusion because my traffic is mixed with the traffic of all others. Now, if Malvad's a bad actor, I'm screwed. That's why HTTPS is really important. And it's also why I use Tails OS and Tor for more sensitive use cases. The other thing that I've done is I moved my Borg backups from 1984. I was self-hosting them to rsync.net. My backups were becoming bigger and bigger, and I wanted to have a more elastic approach. And I'm not a big fan of AWS. And I'm a huge fan of ZFS. So ZFS is a platform that provides extremely resilient file systems that can be used in the context of backups to make sure that if one hard drive in the data center fails, it's possible to recover the data. So I am now using rsync.net, and it's actually quite affordable. At 1984, if I wanted to have 100 gigs, it was $17 a month, which is pretty steep. When using rsync.net, one can pay $18 US a year for that same 18 gigs. So it is like 12 times cheaper, and it's elastic, and you really cannot beat the resilience of ZFS. So that's been a move that I really appreciate. It's the speeds, like the ingress speeds when you send data to rsync.net is not ridiculously high. I think they could improve on this, but given the speeds are reasonable, pricing is reasonable, and data is encrypted on our computers and then just stored there, I don't really need to trust them, although I would. So that's a change. Another change is, you probably know by now that I absolutely love Yubikeys, and I've been using a Yubikey to secure my TOTP 2FA tokens. Those are the 6-digit tokens that you probably use. I also use a Yubikey to store my PGP private keys so that when I encrypt an email or sign a Git commit, it's done on the device and I don't need to fully trust my Mac. Now, I had been using RSA 4096 for the longest of times, but that technology is becoming a little old. Some of you said, son, you should upgrade your guides to use ED-DSA, specifically ED25519. And I have. Actually, I went and created this whole guide that one can follow to generate and air-gap PGP private keys using GNU-PG, Tails, and Yubikey. That guide is super hardcore, hardened, and it's a great way to provision Yubikeys. Now, I will be sharing a whole bunch of Yubikey content shortly. Those pieces of hardware are so very useful. Now, the other thing that has changed that is quite significant is I was advocating, or I had been advocating for 1Password for some time. In the password manager landscape, 1Password, in my opinion, was the most well-engineered, trustworthy, trustless-ish provider, but they decided in 1Password 8 to drop local storage. We can no longer use 1Password without uploading our vaults to their servers. And I have been using mobile less and less because, as you may know by now, if you've been watching this channel for some time, I don't trust smartphone. Those are tracking apparatuses that we just put in our pockets. So I disable most features on this using settings and using custom MDM profiles that I can push to the phone using Apple Configurator 2. If you're excited about this, let me know in the comments. I could create content on it. But essentially, I don't use this so much anymore. So I don't need to synchronize my passwords to it, and instead of doing this, I just want to have a password manager on the computer that uses state-of-the-art encryption, and I want to do my 2FA with the Yubikey. So I no longer really needed 1Password if I wasn't going to sync between mobile and desktop. So I decided to switch to KeePass XC, a password manager that is open source, is scrutinized by a lot of privacy and security researchers, and is the default password manager on Tails. So I love how that password manager is interoperable between operating systems. User experience is not fabulous, but it's good enough. And if I want to move credentials between this computer and my Tails computer, say I'm a little crazy. I actually provision the Yubikeys in the context of TOTP or 2FA on Tails. So I need to log in on Tails. So I actually went about creating an app that's called QR Bridge. And the cool thing with QR Bridge is, say I copy this little piece of content here and I go to QR Bridge, I can then say create from clipboard secure, and it will initiate a cryptographic handshake with Tails. So you can run QR Bridge on Tails, and it will essentially allow the two computers, when they face each other, to exchange encryption keys securely using elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. And then once they've agreed on a symmetric key, information will be passed from one to the other. And that's why I needed webcam support on Tails. It's really shitty from a UX perspective to use like an external webcam, which I did in the past. So I don't need synchronization, built in. I just want to send passwords when necessary between devices. Now that does not work well on iOS. I don't trust the QR code reader on iOS because when you scan a QR code, it can just ignite or trigger search, on a search engine, which is really bad. I might create a QR Bridge version for iOS. Let me know in the comments if that would be exciting. The other thing that I've changed is I was using this bag for the longest of times. It's got some good features, and I might create a whole episode on why I've switched from this to this bag. Moment send me that bag. I wanted to try it out. This is such a story. It's maybe okay. Don't stay tuned for a second here. This bag I used as my everyday carry, to carry my laptop, to carry my keys, and my keys have Yubikeys on them. I don't want to lose them. So I have requirements, weather resistance if my laptop is in it. I don't want my laptop to be damaged if ever I'm stuck in the rain or in a snowstorm here in Canada. I want it to be secure. I don't want a pickpocket to be able to steal my stuff easily. And I want it to have great UX so that when I go to a store, I can just access my stuff real easily. That's why I've been using a messenger bag for the longest of times. So it was really hard, ridiculously hard for me to find an alternative to this. But this guy here was made out of Kevlar or something, and it was just grinding through my clothes. It's ridiculous. I was damaging clothes because of it. So I switched to this bag, and it's been a blast. So I'm going to create a whole episode on a review of the Moment MTW backpack. Pumped about it. I'll be talking about this in a moment. Now, one last thing that I've done this year is I set up a really robust multi-signature Bitcoin holding for donations. Some of you have started donating on LiberaPay or using Bitcoin. I don't monetize my content on YouTube, and it is way too niche for me to be able to earn any significant income from. So for me to do more of this, I need your support. The more support I have, the more time I can allocate to creating this kind of content and doing deep research and then sharing the results, with you versus doing client work. So thanks to everyone who has donated in 2021. It's been really helpful. And since I wanted to do things properly, as you may know, this address here is a multi-sig Bitcoin address. I created a ridiculously hardened wallet for this using a Trezor device, a fail-safe encrypted backup of one of the mnemonics, and Electrum configured using a BIP39 mnemonic versus an Electrum mnemonic. And I use a custom Raspberry Pi project that runs Raspbian OS, Raspberry Pi OS, essentially, that has been hardened. So it is read-only like Tails, and it is also offline. And it allows us to generate encrypted paper backups, such as this one. And these backups can be used to store mnemonics, and they are encrypted with AES-256, so it's really resilient. And the whole process got me very excited about the Bitcoin space. And I will be publishing more Bitcoin content, once in a while on this channel. And if ever you guys need help setting up really resilient and secure Bitcoin holdings, or need help with succession planning, so like what happens if you croak, how to remain sovereign while one is alive, but pass on our wealth to loved ones afterwards. Those are problems that I've been very passionate about this year and have done very deep research on. So if you want to get in touch, I have this page here, Technologists for Hire, and you can get in touch. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that was insightful. A lot more has changed in the studio. Not sure if you're interested in me talking about this. I mean, I have a new camera. I have this Atom Mini Pro to do, live. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see more behind the scenes, and I will see you soon. There's a lot of content coming your way. Hopefully I'll be able to do more and more of this. So thanks for watching, and have an amazing 2022 year. Pumped. Take care. Bye.